She parked in my driveway 41 times. I counted. I have photographs of every single one. 41 times I came home to find her silver SUV sitting in my space like she owned it. 41 times I left notes. I called the HOA. I called the non-emergency police line. I talked to her face to face. And 41 times, nothing changed. So on a Tuesday morning in April, I hired a concrete contractor, had my entire driveway entrance sealed off with a decorative stone wall, packed my bags, and left for a 2-week vacation in Portugal. And while I was eating pastries in Lisbon and watching the sunset over the Tagus River, Karen was standing in front of a solid wall where my driveway used to be, absolutely losing her mind. And I was not there to see it, because I was in Portugal, eating pastries. And it was the best vacation of my entire life. My name is Deb Fortino. I am 58 years old. I am a former middle school art teacher turned freelance graphic designer. I live alone in a 2-bedroom craftsman-style house on Oleander Street in a mid-sized city in northern Georgia. I have lived in that house for 16 years. I bought it right after my divorce was finalized, at a point in my life when I needed something solid and permanent and entirely my own. I painted every room myself. I tiled the kitchen backsplash myself. I planted a small herb garden along the south fence and a wicker swing on the front porch that I have spent more happy hours in than I can count. That house is my sanctuary, my peace, the place where I rebuilt myself after the hardest years of my life. The neighborhood is a modest, quiet one. Single-story homes mostly, built in the late 60s and early 70s, with mature oak trees that arch over the street in summer and turn the whole block into a cathedral of gold in October. Most of my neighbors have been there for years. We know each other well enough to wave, well enough to water each other's plants when someone travels, well enough to leave a casserole on the porch when someone loses a family member. It is the kind of neighborhood where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen, where life moves at a gentle, predictable pace. And then Karen moved in next door. Karen Pellegrino arrived in September 3 years ago. She and her husband Dale bought the house to my immediate right, the yellow 2-story with the overgrown magnolia in the front yard and the detached garage that sat slightly back from the street. I introduced myself the weekend they moved in, brought over a small succulent in a terracotta pot as a welcome gift, and spent about 20 minutes on their front porch while Clara offered me sweet tea she had not yet unpacked a glass for. Karen seemed pleasant enough. She was energetic, fast-talking, the kind of person who fills a room without meaning to. Dale was quieter. He smiled a lot and let Karen do most of the talking, which I suspected was a long-practiced survival strategy. The first incident happened about 6 weeks after they moved in. I came home from a client meeting on a Thursday afternoon, turned onto Oleander Street, and found Karen's silver Chevrolet Suburban parked squarely in my driveway. Not partly in my driveway, not with 2 wheels accidentally over the line. Fully, completely, centered in my driveway, blocking it entirely. My car had nowhere to go. I sat in the street for a moment, genuinely confused, then parked at the curb and walked over to knock on Karen's door. She answered quickly. She was cheerful. She said, oh gosh, she was so sorry. She had just run in for a second to grab something and she would move it right away. She moved it. She waved. She went back inside. I pulled into my driveway and told myself it was a one-time thing. Accidents happen. New neighbor, still getting oriented to the street layout. The second incident was 2 weeks later. Same situation. Silver Suburban in my driveway. This time I was coming home from the grocery store with 2 bags of produce and a gallon of milk. I knocked on her door again. She answered again, cheerful again, same story, just ran in for a second, so sorry, moving it right now. She moved it. I pulled in. I set down my groceries on my kitchen counter and stood there for a moment with a slightly uncomfortable feeling I could not fully name yet. By incident 5, I had named the feeling. It was the specific irritation of someone who is being ignored. Not aggressively ignored, not maliciously ignored, just casually, habitually, cheerfully ignored. Karen was not mean about it. She was never rude when I knocked on her door. She was always apologetic, always quick to move the car, always smiling. But she kept doing it. And the apologies, no matter how warm and genuine they sounded in the moment, clearly did not translate into any change in behavior. Because the next time she needed to park quickly and conveniently, she pulled into my driveway again. Because it was there. Because it was convenient. because whatever small social discomfort she felt when I knocked on her door was apparently not enough friction to make her stop. I left a written note after Incident 6, a polite one, typed neatly and placed under her windshield wiper. I explained that I needed my driveway accessible at all times, that I worked from home and had client meetings and deliveries, and that I would really appreciate if she could park in her own driveway or on the street in front of her own house. She knocked on my door that evening to apologize in person. She was so sweet about it. She brought a small jar of homemade fig preserves. She said it would absolutely never happen again. It happened again 4 days later. I want to be precise about the timeline because I think precision matters when you are telling a story like this. I kept a log. I am a graphic designer. I am organized. I document things. From Incident 7 onward, I noted the date, the time, and whether I was home or discovered it after returning. I photographed each instance with my phone, capturing the timestamp in the photo. I did this not because I was planning some elaborate revenge at that point, but because I am the kind of person who tracks things, and because some part of my brain was already quietly preparing for the possibility that I might eventually need evidence. By the time I reached Incident 15, I had contacted the HOA for the first time. Oleander Street is part of the Garden View HOA, a fairly typical suburban homeowners association with a board of 5 elected volunteers and a part-time management company that handled administrative functions. The rules were clear and had been clear for decades. Homeowner driveways were the private property of the homeowner. No parking in another resident's driveway without explicit permission. Violations could result in a formal warning, followed by a fine schedule of increasing severity. I submitted my complaint in writing with photographs attached. The HOA management company sent Karen a formal notice within the week. Karen signed the receipt. Incident 16 happened the following Tuesday. I submitted a second complaint. The HOA sent a second notice. This one included a warning that continued violations would result in a fine of $75 per incident. Incident 17 happened on Saturday. I waited. I wanted to see if the fine notice would produce a result that the first 2 notices had not. I gave it a full 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, Karen did not park in my driveway once. I thought perhaps the financial consequence had finally created enough friction to change the behavior. I felt genuinely relieved. I was tired of this. I had not asked for this small, exhausting drama in my life. I just wanted to pull into my own driveway without incident. That was the entirety of my desire. Incident 18 was a month later. It was a Sunday morning and I was sleeping in. I discovered it at 10 a.m. when I walked out to get the newspaper. My driveway, her car, again. I called the non-emergency police line for the first time. The officer who came out was polite and professional. He explained to me that in Georgia, for a vehicle parked on private residential property, the property owner typically needs to contact a private tow company rather than the police department, as the police do not have jurisdiction to initiate the tow themselves. He could make a note of the incident, but could not compel the vehicle to be moved. He suggested I contact a tow company. I thanked him. I called a tow company. By the time the tow truck arrived, Karen had already moved the car. She had apparently seen the police cruiser from her window and moved it before the tow truck even turned onto our street. I paid the tow company a $40 call-out fee for a tow that did not happen. I stood in my driveway with $40 less in my pocket and felt something shift inside me. Not rage exactly, more like a quiet, absolute determination that was colder and more focused than rage. I was done with the polite approach. I was done with notes and HOA complaints and smiling apologies and homemade fig preserves. I needed a solution that did not depend on Karen's cooperation, because Karen's cooperation, I had now clearly established, was never going to come. The question was what kind of solution? I spent about 2 weeks thinking about it seriously. I considered towing. The problem was that Karen always seemed to move the car before the tow truck arrived, either because she was watching or because she had enough neighbors who would text her if they saw a tow truck on the street. I considered putting up temporary barriers, those plastic bollard posts you can anchor in concrete, but I looked into the HOA rules and discovered that any permanent or semi-permanent alteration to the front of the property visible from the street required board approval and had to meet aesthetic guidelines. I considered a gate, which would also require approval. And then I thought about the stone wall. My driveway was a single car width, running straight from the street to my detached carport at the back of the lot. The driveway entrance was flanked on both sides by a low concrete curb and a strip of grass between my property line and the sidewalk. The street-facing front of my property had an existing low flower bed border that I had installed years ago, a simple row of flat stones forming a loose decorative edge along the grass. It was not tall, it was not imposing. But it had established the visual language of a property that valued stone landscaping. What if I thought I extended that landscaping concept? What if I built a decorative stone garden wall, properly designed, aesthetically appropriate, entirely compliant with HOA guidelines for front yard landscaping, that simply filled in the driveway entrance with an attractive planter structure, leaving only a narrow pedestrian path and redirecting vehicular access to a secondary entrance on the side of my property? My carport was accessible from either end of the lot. The lot had a narrow side easement on the left that connected to the alley behind the houses. I had always used the front driveway out of habit and convenience, but there was no technical reason I could not reroute my own driveway access through the side easement. It would add maybe 30 seconds to the process of pulling my car around back. But it would also mean that the front driveway entrance, the one Karen kept parking in, would cease to exist as a driveway entrance. It would become a garden feature, a beautiful, carefully landscaped, HOA-compliant garden feature with ornamental grasses and river stone and a small raised planter bed. I called a landscape contractor named Mitch Everett, who had done some work on my back garden 2 summers before. I described what I wanted. He came over, looked at the space, took measurements and quoted me a price. It was not cheap. It was about $2,200 for the wall construction, the planter installation, the stone work, and the side path gradding and gravel to make the easement access smooth and usable. I thought about it for exactly 1 day. Then I called Mitch back and told him to schedule it. But here is the part where I made the decision that turned a practical solution into something more than that. Mitch told me he could do the job in 2 to 3 days, but that his first available window was in about 6 weeks. That gave me time to plan. And as I thought about the timing, I realized that 6 weeks from now was exactly when I had been considering taking a trip. My friend Rosaria had been asking me for almost 2 years to come visit her in Lisbon, where she had moved after her own retirement. I kept putting it off, the way you put off things that require actually unplugging from your life and letting yourself be somewhere else for a while. I had not taken a real vacation in 4 years. I called Rosaria that same evening. I told her I was coming to Lisbon for 2 weeks. She screamed with delight. I booked the flights the next morning. Then I called Mitch back and gave him the specific window. Start the job the Monday morning after I leave. Have it completed before I return. I want to come home to a finished wall. Mitch said that worked perfectly for his schedule. I did not tell Karen I was doing any of this. I did not tell the HOA, though I had already reviewed the guidelines carefully and confirmed that the project was compliant. It was classified as front yard landscaping and ornamental hardscaping, which was permitted with a simple notification form rather than full board approval, as long as it met height and material guidelines, which my plan did. I submitted the notification form. I received an automated acknowledgement. No issues. I did not put up any sign. I did not send any letter. I did not knock on Karen's door and explain what was coming. I simply continued my life for 6 weeks as normal. I came and went through my front driveway as always. I smiled and waved at Karen when I saw her outside. I answered her cheerful hello with my own cheerful hello. I was perfectly pleasant. I was also counting down. During those 6 weeks, incidents 39, 40, and 41 occurred. Incident 41 was the morning I left for the airport. I came outside at 5:30 a.m. with my suitcase to find Karen's Suburban sitting in my driveway. I looked at it for a moment in the pre-dawn dark. Then I walked around it, rolled my suitcase to the street, called a rideshare, and left for the airport without waking Karen up or moving the car or leaving a note. As my rideshare turned off Oleander Street onto the main road, I looked back through the rear window at my house, at the driveway, at the silver Suburban sitting there in the dark. I thought, enjoy it, that's the last time. Then I faced forward and started thinking about Lisbon. I landed in Lisbon on a Tuesday morning, disoriented and blissfully tired in the way that only long international flights produce. Rosaria met me at the airport in a small yellow car and immediately handed me a coffee and started talking. We drove through the city as the morning light came up gold over the old buildings and the river glittered in the distance, and I felt something inside me that had been clenched for 3 years slowly, gradually begin to release. Rosaria lived in a third-floor apartment in Alfama, the old Moorish quarter of the city, where the streets are so narrow that 2 people can shake hands from opposite windows and the sound of fado music floats up from the restaurant below on weekend evenings. Her apartment had a small balcony with a green iron railing and a view of the castle on the hill and the river beyond. I sat on that balcony the first morning with coffee and a pastel de nata and felt more at peace than I had in years. Mitch sent me the first project update photo on Wednesday afternoon. He had cleared the driveway entrance area and begun setting the foundation stones for the wall. He sent a second photo Thursday showing the wall taking shape. He was using a warm honey-colored limestone that complemented the craftsman exterior of my house beautifully. The planter beds on either side of the narrowed pedestrian entrance were outlined with a lower ring of the same stone. It was genuinely attractive work. Looking at those photos, while sitting on Rosaria's balcony, I felt the deep satisfaction of someone who has found an elegant solution to an ugly problem. Mitch finished the job on Friday afternoon. He sent me a final set of photos from multiple angles. The front of my property had been transformed. Where the driveway entrance had been, there was now a gorgeous stone garden feature, a low wall about 18 inches high with a raised central planter already filled with ornamental grasses and lavender, flanked by river stone ground cover and 2 small ornamental olive trees in terracotta pots. A narrow brick walkway cut through the center for pedestrian access. To the left, the side easement path had been graded and graveled into a clean, functional vehicular access route leading to the carport. It looked like I had planned it this way from the beginning. It looked intentional and considered and attractive because it was. That is the thing about a well-executed solution. It does not look like retaliation. It looks like design. I sent Mitch a 5-star review and a digital tip. Then Rosaria and I went out for dinner in Bairro Alto, and I did not think about Oleander Street again for 4 more days. Part 2. Rosaria has a friend named Marco who runs small private tour of places that are not in the guidebooks. On our 5th day in Lisbon, he took us to a Miradouro, a hilltop viewpoint. That is technically accessible to the public, but that almost no tourists find because it requires knowing which unmarked alley to take off a particular side street. We sat there for 2 hours in the late afternoon with wine and cheese and watched the light change over the city and the river and the distant bridge that looks impossibly like the Golden Gate. I thought about nothing in particular. I felt enormously, extravagantly content. My phone buzzed. It was an email from my neighbor across the street, a retired electrician named Hector Domings who had lived on Oleander Street for 22 years and who had a dry, observant sense of humor and an unwavering commitment to neighborhood drama as a form of entertainment. The email had no subject line. The body was 3 sentences. Your wall looks great, by the way. Karen has been standing in front of it for about 20 minutes now. I made popcorn. I showed the email to Rosaria. She read it and looked at me with an expression of pure delight. What is she doing? Rosaria asked. Standing in front of a wall, I said, where my driveway used to be. Rosaria started laughing, not a polite laugh, a real one that echoed off the old buildings around us and made Marco look up from his wine with a questioning expression. I emailed Hector back and asked him to keep me posted if anything interesting developed. Over the following 3 days, Hector's emails became my favorite form of entertainment. Day 1, Karen had knocked on the door of my house, received no answer, obviously, because I was in Lisbon. She had then walked around to the side of the property, presumably to look at the new access path. She had stood there for a while. She had gone back home. Day 2, Karen had knocked on the door of my house again, this time with Dale. They had both stood in front of the wall. Dale had taken photographs. Karen had apparently said something to Dale that Hector could not hear from across the street, but that Hector described as the kind of talking where both hands are moving. Day 2, evening update. Karen had knocked on Hector's door. She asked him if he knew what had happened to my driveway. Hector told her he had no idea. He guessed Deb decided to do some landscaping. Karen asked if he knew where I was. Hector said he thought I had gone on vacation. Karen asked when I would be back. Hector said he really wasn't sure, maybe a couple weeks. Hector reported that Karen's face went through what he described as at least 4 separate emotions in about 2 seconds. Day 3, Karen had submitted a complaint to the HOA saying that I had made an unauthorized modification to my front yard. Hector knew this because he was friends with one of the board members who had texted him about it with no small amount of amusement, because the board member had seen my compliant notification form on file and had already confirmed with the management company that my project had been properly submitted and approved. The complaint was going nowhere. I read these updates from various points around Lisbon, from a cafe in Sintra where Rosaria and I had taken the train for a day trip to see the colorful palaces in the hills, from a bench overlooking the sea at Cascais in the late afternoon, from the balcony in Alfama with my morning coffee. I read them, smiled, put my phone down, and went back to being in Portugal. There is something deeply restorative about being unreachable, not in a hiding sense, not in an avoidance sense, but in the sense of having genuinely removed yourself from a situation so completely that there is nothing left to react to. Karen could knock on my door, she could stand in front of my wall, she could complain to the HOA, she could send Dale out to take photographs, she could use both hands when she talked. None of it required anything from me. I was not there, I was in Lisbon. And the wall was exactly where it was supposed to be, doing exactly what it was designed to do, requiring no maintenance or management from me whatsoever. That is the genius of a structural solution as opposed to a confrontational one. A confrontational solution requires you to keep showing up. You have to keep arguing, keep defending, keep escalating. A structural solution just sits there. It does not need you. It works around the clock, in every weather, whether you are home or in Europe eating custard tarts. It simply exists, solid and permanent, until the problem it was designed to solve quietly ceases to be a problem. On day 8, I received an email not from Hector, but from Karen herself. She had apparently gotten my email address from the neighborhood directory that the HOA maintained for residents. The email was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph explained that she had come home to find my driveway completely changed, and that she was very confused and honestly a little upset because she had not been informed of any planned construction. The second paragraph said that she and Dale had been using my driveway occasionally for convenience, and that while she understood that was probably not ideal, she did not think it warranted such a drastic and permanent change to the property, and that she hoped we could have a conversation about this when you get back. The third paragraph said that she had also noticed the new side path and hoped that was working out okay for me, and that she was available to talk any time. I read that email twice on the balcony in Alfama. The morning was warm. The castle was golden on the hill above me. The fado from last night had been replaced by the sound of a woman singing somewhere in the building, something wordless and contented. I thought about how to respond. I thought about it for about 30 seconds. Then I decided not to respond at all, not yet, not from Lisbon. There was nothing that required an immediate response. She was not in distress. She was not in danger. She was simply a woman who had parked in my driveway 41 times and was now experiencing the consequence of that, which was a wall and which was, all things considered, an extremely mild consequence. I put my phone down and went to make another coffee. Rosaria and I spent the afternoon in the National Tile Museum looking at centuries of hand-painted azulejo panels. I bought a small decorative tile with a blue and white geometric pattern to hang in my kitchen. We had dinner at a place near the waterfront where the grilled fish came with roasted potatoes and good local wine, and the waiter called everyone my friend with complete sincerity. I slept extremely well that night. I returned to Oleander Street on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks to the day after I had left. My rideshare turned onto the street, and I saw my house from a distance, and I saw the wall. Seeing it in person for the first time was different from the photographs. The photographs had shown me the structure. Seeing it in person showed me the effect. The front of my house looked finished in a way it never had before. The honey stone and the ornamental grasses and the lavender and the terracotta pots looked intentional and considered, like a property that had been thoughtfully designed by someone who cared about how it presented to the street, which I had been. I paid the rideshare, rolled my suitcase up the new side path to my carport, came in through the back door, and stood in my own kitchen for a moment in the quiet. My house smelled like itself, like the herbs from the garden and the wood of the floors, and something faintly floral from the dried lavender bunch on the windowsill. I was home. I unpacked. I ran a load of laundry. I walked to the corner store and bought groceries. I came back, made dinner, and sat on my front porch on the wicker swing with a glass of wine and looked at my street in the evening light. Hector was watering his front garden across the street. He looked up, saw me, and raised one hand in a slow, satisfied wave. I raised my wine glass back. Karen's silver Suburban was parked in her own driveway. It had been there, Hector had told me via a final email update the previous day, consistently every single day for the past week and a half. It had not moved to my property. It had not moved to the street in front of my house. It had stayed, quietly and obediently, in her own driveway where it had always belonged. The wall had done in 10 days what 41 incidents, multiple HOA complaints, a police call, and countless face-to-face conversations had failed to do. I took a sip of my wine. I sat with the warm evening settling around me. The oaks were budding. The air smelled like Georgia in April, which is one of the finer things in this world, that specific combination of cut grass and wisteria and the particular sweetness of a spring evening that is warm enough to sit outside but cool enough to be comfortable. Karen came out of her front door about 20 minutes later. She saw me on the porch. She paused for a fraction of a second. Then she raised her hand in the kind of wave that contains an entire conversation, part apology, part acknowledgement, part request to simply move forward as neighbors without ever explicitly addressing anything that had happened. I waved back, same wave, same tone. She went back inside. I finished my wine. I thought about Lisbon, about the balcony in Alfama and the light on the castle and the fado drifting up from below, about Rosaria laughing with both hands over her mouth at Hector's email from the Miradoro, about Marco and the wine and the river and the bridge, about the pastel de nata on the first morning when something inside me unclenched for the first time in 3 years. I thought about the tile I had brought back, the blue and white geometric one, currently sitting in my suitcase waiting to be hung in the kitchen. I thought about the wall, about Mitch's careful workmanship and the honey limestone and the ornamental grasses already swaying slightly in the evening breeze, about how it looked exactly the way I had imagined it when I first had the idea, 6 weeks ago, sitting at my kitchen table with a solution taking shape in my mind that was cleaner and more permanent and more satisfying than anything confrontational could ever have been. Some problems, I have learned, do not need a conversation. They need architecture. I went inside and started looking for the right nail for my new tile. 3 months later, the HOA held their spring general meeting. I attended, as I try to do at least once a year. One of the agenda items was a proposed amendment to the community rules around driveway usage, specifically adding clearer language about the definition of private driveway access and the enforcement procedures for unauthorized parking on private residential driveways. The amendment had been proposed by Angela, not our Angela from the Propane story, a different Angela. This Angela was a retired civil engineer who had lived on the street behind mine for about 8 years and who had apparently had her own driveway situation with a different neighbor some years back. The amendment passed unanimously. Karen and Dale attended the meeting. They sat 3 rows in front of me. When the driveway amendment came up for discussion, Karen did not say anything. She looked at the agenda in her lap. Dale looked at the ceiling. When the vote was called, both of their hands went up in favor. After the meeting, in the parking lot, Karen walked up to me. She was carrying a Tupperware container. She held it out to me and said that she had made lemon bars and thought maybe I would like some. I took the Tupperware. I looked at her. She was doing the expression she always did when she was apologizing without using the word sorry, that particular arrangement of earnest eye contact and slight chin tilt that I had seen on her doorstep many times over the past 3 years. I said, "Thank you." She nodded. She started to walk away. Then she stopped and turned back. She said, "Your wall is really beautiful, by the way. I've been meaning to say that. It really suits the house." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Thank you, Karen. I'm really happy with how it came out." She nodded again. She walked to her car. She drove away. I stood in the parking lot, holding the Tupperware of lemon bars in the cool spring evening. I thought about 41 incidents. I thought about notes and phone calls and HOA complaints and a $40 tow truck fee for a truck that never towed anything. I thought about a wrench and a pre-dawn driveway and a silver Suburban in the dark and a rideshare turning off Oleander Street while I looked back through the window. I thought about a tile on my kitchen wall, about lavender in a stone planter bed, about a wicker swing and a glass of wine and Hector's slow, satisfied wave from across the street. I thought about Lisbon.